Hello lady lovers. This video is going to be a bit different. I'm not going to edit together the footage of the show over my words like I usually do. I'm just going to sit down with you for a chat and a talk about the end of the 13th era on Doctor Who and my Thasmin thoughts next to this crackling fire. Why? Well, Doctor Who didn't just copyright claim, but copyright blocked my last video, so don't want to go through that again. This will probably be long, and I have other videos I want to make, but I also just need to get this out of me as a way to figure out what I even feel about this whole era. I love some things, I disliked some things, and if I was to summarize how I felt about it all, I'd say that it had all the potential of the universe, and yet. So, grab a hot cocoa, pumpkin spice or tea of your choice and cozy up with me for this retrospective on the 13th era. So, it's been a few weeks since 13 regenerated into 410, 10.4, 10.2, dare I say 14. It feels like 13 has been thrown to the wayside, dropped like a hot potato, overshadowed by 2 seconds and an incredulous what by the returning darling of the New Who era, and it would be amusing to see how readily the David Tennant stans rose from their graves, wheezing their excitement if it wasn't for how painfully reminiscent this was of this pattern around how queer women are treated in media. Yes, we did get a canon queer companion and a canon queer doctor, but the tentative half efforts that were given to developing this pairing was just so full of potential. God, so full of potential. It was actually pretty heartbreaking now that I see what we actually got. After the initial excitement of the power of the Doctor abated, because it was a fantastic romp, and I started to think about the narrative we were given over the 3 seasons, I was left feeling a bit deflated and even feeling a bit stupid for hoping, once again, that a franchise like Doctor Who would know what to do with the queer storyline. This isn't my first rodeo, but I seem to have hope eternal as if it was. If you follow my channel, and by the way, if you're not subscribed, you totally should, you'll know that I recently finished my 2-part series on the history of sapphic women in film and TV. So this pattern of underserving queer women is particularly fresh in my mind, having literally watched over 100 years of history that highlighted how we were as a group often ignored, silenced, and given less space to exist. I mean, not to be dramatic or anything, but I'm just feeling it right now. Especially as this coincides with getting through season 9 of Doctor Who, as I tried but didn't quite manage to finish a rewatch before the power of the Doctor, and seeing the massive difference in how Clara and the Doctor were allowed to be versus how Yaz and the Doctor were. Also, this rides on the back of approximately 19 sapphic shows that got cancelled this year. Doctor Who, in a way, I guess gets to join that list because though the show is not cancelled due to its built-in regeneration that sees a different actor picking up the mantle every few seasons, it has effectively ended the era with the 2 lead sapphic people exiting the show. But before we go any further, let me just clarify that what we did get was not queerbaiting, because I know some people have thrown that word around and it feels like it's become a bit of a misunderstood buzzword when it comes to sapphic representation, and it really wasn't. Both explicitly expressed their interest in the other, so although some of us may not have liked how Thasmin was handled, it was textually explicit and therefore can't be called queerbaiting. But yeah, in terms of making this a good sapphic storyline, it feels like they didn't know what to do, or they didn't care enough to do something with it even once it was handed to them on a platter, or perhaps they spent all their energy trying to, I don't know, navigate the fact that 13 was a woman, and it's like that absorbed every ounce of character development and coherent story structure that Chris Chibnall in his writer's room had. Maybe they were too busy plotting the next time 13 would get kidnapped, tied up, restrained, or otherwise put in some kind of prison to be lectured at, something that the YouTuber Mr. TARDIS pointed out happened disproportionately to 13 compared to the other incarnations of the Doctor, creating some rather unfortunate gender optics. I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy the characters or the storytelling. I did, and I adore having a female Doctor. It's silly, but it matters, even for me, a grown-ass woman, to see this kind of rep, and bar a few moments when it was alluded to, her being a woman was just not an issue. She got to exist without her gender being a thing, which I loved. I have to give the writers props for that. But it also reminded me of Catherine Janeway as the first female captain on another major long-running sci-fi franchise, Star Trek Voyager. From what I've seen about why Catherine Janeway has frequently been slammed as the worst captain of the franchise, it's often due to the wonky reasoning that stranded her ship and crew on the other end of the universe, and then a pattern of headstrong and sometimes rash decisions as she tried to get her crew home. Honestly, I don't think she would have been given quite as hard a time if she hadn't been a woman. And there have been some videos in the last few years on YouTube exploring the idea that maybe she wasn't quite as terrible as she's been unilaterally branded by fans. Voyager was also routinely touted as the worst series of the franchise, people citing the episodic nature of the show and how they didn't dare get gritty, often using the reset button to do away with consequences, when Deep Space Nine, on at the same time, was all about consequences and therefore seen as better. The thing is that Voyager was not out of place for the time with this approach, and it wasn't trying to be a show like Deep Space Nine or Battlestar Galactica, which it's often compared with. But people got really hung up on this point. The irony is that despite Voyager being seen as the worst series of the franchise up to the 90s, in 2017, Netflix announced that 6 out of the 10 most rewatched episodes were from Voyager. I guess it only took 30 years for people to wrap their heads around that series. It felt like fans were more prone to attacking and nitpicking the show, giving rational reasons for thinking that way, but unable to acknowledge that they may also be biased, unable to factor in a female protagonist in a space where men have previously been. In a world where the default character is the cis, white, heterosexual, usually American man, women have had to do a certain amount of translating to connect with these male heroes. Queer women of colour with disability, etc., have to do infinitely more translations so that they can connect with these heroes, and we're expected to. Men have to do vastly less translation, and are not expected to identify with female protagonists because that is girly stuff. I'm not saying this as an indictment, just as a fact of how media is set up. So when they're confronted with protagonists that don't reflect their reality in the show, suddenly they have to translate and they don't like it. They feel like it's just not as good, which would naturally lead to harsher criticisms. And to a certain extent, it feels like 13's era has been labouring under the same kind of weight. If I had a penny for every time it happened, I'd have 2 pennies, which is not a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. Well, actually, I would have a few more pennies from movies like Ghostbusters and Ocean's 8, and I'm sure there are plenty of others that I can't think of or don't know about. But yeah, I'd have 4 pennies. I watched an excellent deconstruction of this phenomenon by Sarah Z called Sacrificial Trash. I'll link the video in the description. But the TLDR is, it essentially examines this trend where anything that strays too far from the cis, het, white male narrative will get labelled as woke garbage by bad agents on the internet, and a kind of smear campaign will start to turn people against the thing. Usually starting with dislikes and review bombing and negative comments even before the thing has come out, like with 13 before a single episode aired, like with the trailer of the live-action Little Mermaid movie that has a black actress in the role, like how A League of Their Own was review bombed on IMDb. If it happens to actually be not that good, then the general viewership, who aren't necessarily bigots, will jump on that bandwagon, and suddenly the internet is awash with incredibly negative sentiments that far outstrip how bad the piece of media actually is, because often the bandwagoning comes with a hefty side of unconscious bias. Which is how you get a pretty savage 5-hour critique of 13's era, going into the minutiae of just how awful this era is. Link in the description if you want to put yourself through that. And yes, I did watch all 5 hours of it. I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of the points made there, and I'm not suggesting that the guy who made it, Jay, disliked the era because 13 was a woman. It's more about how hard, and you could even say gleefully, he and a lot of fans went to town on this era, with people popping into my comments on other videos I've done on Doctor Who to declare that 13 is hashtag not their doctor, rip the show, etc. Oh, and how could I forget how that conservative UK MP tried to claim that casting a woman doctor was responsible for an increase in crime. It's clearly a terrible take, but there is a certain slice of fans who seem to have a similar knee-jerk reaction to 13 being a woman, and when season 11 was pretty dire, a lot of the fandom jumped on to savagely critique the show. I don't think the criticisms would have been as bad if 13 had been a man. But regardless of 13's gender, season 11 was not good. Both in my initial viewing and rewatch, it disappointed, and I was so ready to love it. Character development was faint to non-existent in anything but the most broad strokes, which means we never really got to know these characters, neither the Doctor nor the companions. I know old Who had multiple companion situations, but New Who has largely been a one companion and one Doctor kind of show, except for maybe when Rory was around. And suddenly it's 3 of them. It honestly felt like they were overcompensating for the fact that the Doctor was a woman. And then there was no real fleshing out of any one of them beyond 1 or 2 character motifs. This has been discussed ad nauseum by other Who fans, so I don't want to get into details on that, except to say that I've heard the analogy of the Doctor being like a kind of impersonal tour guide for the fam, and yeah, that kind of says it all. There was no depth there. The season kept dancing on the surface of things, ignoring character development to push plot. And not that the plot was necessarily great. The episodes of this first season were just clunky messes with how they tried to explore their themes. In all honesty, I liked maybe 3 episodes of the season. And look, I have no problem with a moral or social commentary in a show, but it has to be done well. Sometimes what it was even trying to say got so mixed up that it sounded like the show was endorsing a dehumanizing work environment a la Amazon and Kablam. Reminds me of that time the X-Files did a reboot, and I have to assume by accident, I really hope by accident, wrote a racist anti-Muslim episode. Thasmin in this season was purely accidental, as the idea wasn't brought to Chibnall's attention by Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill, who saw the speculation online, until after. Although it does seem pretty random for Yaz's mum to be asking if she's dating the Doctor. Having said that, I've been there before a number of times when a totally gay narrative emerges from a show where the writers didn't intend it. But there were some small moments that totally played into a possible queer narrative. I definitely saw it, and so did a lot of others. Moments like the parallel between how Yaz asked the Doctor about what she was going to do at the start of Arachnids in the UK, just like Rose had done with 10. The Doctor's very clear joy at Yaz asking her for tea. Yaz claiming that she's the best person she's ever met and wanting to spend more time with her and see more of the universe. How she looks at the Doctor when she's apple bobbing as if the Doctor is simultaneously the silliest and cutest thing that she's ever seen. How the Doctor claims there can't be a universe without Yaz, and I'll talk about the theme of the universe in a bit. I thought season 12 got better. The writing was smoother, there was an arc with the introduction of the Master, and I thought Sacha Dhawan was a phenomenal Master, and we got a bit of substance for the Doctor to sink her teeth into. She had to go deeper than the jovial tour guide facade. Characters from previous seasons turned up, thankfully, to tap into the vast history of the show, all of which was severely missed in season 11. And look, I know many people hated The Timeless Child, but I thought it was exciting. It cracked open an entirely new level of potential storytelling. I've listened to those who don't like this development, and I get it. It retcons some major things, causes some very knotty questions about previous situations, especially around regeneration and Gallifreyan history, and then elements of how it was revealed wasn't done well. Info dumping the revelation on 13 with extended exposition is kind of the cardinal sin of storytelling, and it epitomizes the writing issues of the era, and it wasn't the only time it happened. I've also heard that those who dislike it, usually long-time fans, dislike it because the Doctor was meant to be some random who stole a TARDIS and ran away, not anyone special, not a chosen one. Making them the little child that brought regeneration to Gallifrey upended this discourse and made the Doctor this incredibly important person all of a sudden, which I get. If that's how you've related to the Doctor, then suddenly it's become a different story, but they can still be that idiot that stole the TARDIS and gallivants around the universe and also be the Timeless Child. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I also don't feel like the Doctor being the Timeless Child means that they are in any way special. This kid is dumped at a portal, and it could have been a totally random thing, not some masterful plan to, shape the universe. For me, this background provides a treasure trove of possible motivations for what, perhaps unconsciously, led the Doctor to stealing the TARDIS in the first place. A treasure trove of history that they don't know about themselves. A treasure trove of possible implications as to why the Doctor is always running from one situation to another, from one companion to another, never able to rest or truly look at themselves and figure out what's going on inside. Who they are is completely up in the air. What they know about themselves is changed. Everything is up for reinterpretation, which is exciting. At least for me. My mind is whirring with all the possibilities that, let's be real, will likely never manifest because Chibnall was out without elaborating on it in any meaningful way, and Russell T Davies will probably ignore it. With the reappearance of the Master, the Doctor shut herself off. She didn't share anything about what was going on with the fam, although she clearly wasn't doing okay and they could see that. On a character level, it made sense. The Doctor has spent their entire lives losing people, and 12 lost both Clara and Bill in pretty awful ways. So keeping the fam safe was immediately established as the primary concern, which, by the way, she managed to do. She got them all home safe. This also manifested not just in a desire to keep them physically safe, but I guess you could say emotionally safe too. To an extent, I kind of liked the resistance 13 had to letting them in. I do like me a bit of angst. I was a Bearing and Well shipper after all, but it also frustrated me because this didn't change during the era. We didn't get a catharsis for this immense weighted burden she carries around inside of her. We barely got it textually acknowledged because it wasn't like she eventually let the fam, or specifically Yaz, who stayed the longest, in on anything much. Unlike pretty much all of her other companions. Well, at least for New Who. I haven't watched Old Who, so I can't comment on that. A big part of how I at least felt that I could understand and get to know the Doctor was through their relationship with their companions, how they bantered and challenged each other. Except here we got this at arm's length dynamic, which meant we didn't get to dig into that relationship. This at arm's length dynamic applied to Thasmin. Through the 12th season, we got a few subtextual references to Thasmin, but in an incredibly opaque kind of way. It's there for those who pick up on that narrative thread and are looking for that information, but I get why so many people didn't clock anything. If people can watch Xena Warrior Princess and not see the gay when it was 10,000 times more gay than Thasmin, then it's no surprise to me that people felt like this came out of nowhere. In season 12, Chibnall was aware and purposely putting in elements to feed the eventual canonization of Thasmin, but very subtle. It came in the form of specific costume decisions, in parallels to canon guest couples. You could probably infer that Yaz's trauma that we saw in the episode Can You Hear Me was the result of bullying at school for being queer, which may have resulted in some possible suicide or ideation. Not that that was ever acknowledged, this is just guesswork. There were also a few small moments, like when Yaz went off on her own to investigate in Praxis and the Doctor looked back from the TARDIS door, but really, even with the writers purposely slow-burning Thasmin, there wasn't a whole lot done to grow their relationship in season 12. That is to say that there was really no storyline nor screen time dedicated to doing that. It was all breadcrumbs. The biggest indicator of feelings, on Yaz's side at least, came only with the New Year special resolutions that came between season 12 and 13, which is where it became clear that Yaz had been struggling with the Doctor gone for the last 10 months in a way that Graham and Ryan hadn't. She was doggedly determined to find her, but struggling to figure out how to fly that other TARDIS. When she whispers to herself, "Let it be the Doctor," when the Doctor's TARDIS begins to materialize, and her surprise shoving of the Doctor indicated just how hard this had been for her. Her conversation with Jack Harkness built on this beautifully too, expressing not just her attachment to the Doctor, but equally the wonders she'd been able to see because of the Doctor. The speech in particular will play into my thoughts on how Yaz then left the show at the end of Power of the Doctor. If season 13 had played out differently, then I wouldn't have had a problem with how Thasmin had been developed up to this point, because it was kind of fun to find the little moments. So to point, I don't mind what we got, especially as with Graham and Ryan gone, this was theoretically Thasmin's moment to shine, as they got to explore the universe, just the two of them. But yeah, it didn't exactly happen. Now, season 13 was, due to the pandemic, a compromise season. It was meant to be 8 episodes. We got 6, which is half of what a typical Doctor Who season had in the 10 seasons preceding 13's era. Half, which means that we got a whole 12 episodes less of 13 compared to other Doctors over her run. Overall, promotion of 13's era has been pretty disappointing, typified by how the power of the Doctor was so poorly promoted. But I guess money, pandemic, anti-13 sentiments, etc., meant we got what we did. I really enjoyed The Flux. I was excited by it. I thought it was an entertaining, rollicking adventure. It crammed far too much into its meagre 6 episodes, for sure, but it was coherent enough for me to flow with it. I enjoyed the single storyline because it allowed us to delve deeper into the ideas it brought up, unlike the usual episodic format. Not to mention, the production value was fantastic. I thought Swarm and Azure were the best new villains from the 13th era, so I was sad to see them go, and I enjoyed getting to go deeper into things like the Division, Tecteun, and just generally following the thread of the Timeless Child. Would that we could have gotten more answers, because there are so many threads dangling now, and I suspect they will not get tied up for a long time, if ever. In the same way that the scope of the Timeless Child excited me, the idea of the Division as a group that operates outside the universe also got my mind a-whirring with possibilities. This season, they once again reference the Doctor as being the universe, which honestly, I like this idea a lot in a figurative but also literal sense. The whole discussion with Azure, where she is asking why it's so important to the Doctor that things exist and thrive, felt like the tip of a metaphysical iceberg that poses questions about the meaning of life, the nature of existence, and what exists beyond the material realm of time and space. Azure and Swarm were like the flip side of the Doctor, she who wanted the universe to thrive and exist, and they who were nihilistically positing that nothing in the universe ultimately matters. It's all made up anyway. These tap into some fascinating philosophies and spiritual discussions out there, and I'm a bit of a sucker for it. It also again touched on the trauma of the Doctor, who not only had her bodily autonomy stolen from her through experimentations and forced regenerations, but also having her memory stolen, one of the most intimate things that can be taken away from someone. In this way, having 13 be a woman was used to good effect, because this theme of compromised bodily autonomy is only too real for women who deal with bodies that have been politicized with abortion rights and as the primary victims of physical and sexual assault. Though the answers to her past were scarce, it felt satisfying that she got the pocket watch back, containing her memories, as a symbolic form of taking back what had been robbed from her, even if she didn't want to face it. So on this level, I loved season 13. What was frustrating, however, was that 13 and Yaz were separated once again. Separation between 13 and her companion have been a repeated motif of the era. The Doctor was often off on her own, either off screen or during an episode, reinforcing the sense of distance between herself and her companions for the era. The disappointment for me was that this season could have offered so much more opportunity for that distance between Yaz and the Doctor to be bridged, but 13 stayed stubbornly alone and isolated until the very end. The Thasmin in the season was a lot more obvious, with Yaz pushing to be let in at the start of the season and asking for answers. And then there's how she spent 4 years playing the hologram on repeat. The fact that the Doctor had the foresight to know that Yaz would need that hologram if they got separated again, and how she says she misses Yaz is probably the biggest indicator that the Doctor cares for Yaz and is thinking of her feelings. The hug when they are finally reunited is very touching. And then there is when the Doctor apologizes for keeping Yaz out and saying she wants to tell her everything. An exciting moment, because it seems that the Doctor is finally ready to let Yaz in. I loved it. I'm such a sap for it. It had me hook, line and sinker. With Eve of the Daleks, where Yaz's feelings were finally explicitly discussed, there was a certain excitement about it, and I discussed this in my first Doctor Who video, link at the top of the screen. And as an emotional core to that special, it worked beautifully, to complement the simple but effective storyline it was telling. Definitely a favourite special for the era. As wonderful as having textual acknowledgement of Yaz's feelings, it was just so late in the game that it was clear that not much would come of it. If the following 2 specials had better writing for Thasmin, it wouldn't have been a problem, but Legend of the Sea Devils was a mess. I talk about that in my review of the episode. But for all that it gave significant time for a chat between 13 and Yaz, it felt like nothing was really said except for 13 to shut down any possibility of anything happening. Done. Over with very little actually said except that she's afraid of hurting. Well, it's gonna hurt anyway, Doctor. Telling Yaz everything, this was not. Instead, it was a heart-crushing moment that took away all hope for them, and Yaz just quietly and painfully accepting it without even a murmur of protest or asking why. And did the doctor really return those feelings? I mean, even that's not clear. She's attached to Yaz, she cares for her, but does she love her like Yaz loves her? Initially, I guess I felt like yes. She spoke of being a good date and saying that she thought that Yaz was one of the greatest people she'd ever known and comparing her to River Song, but that she can't go there. I've heard that before. It's not you, it's me discourse. The I'm not ready, when probably what it means is I have feelings for you, but not enough to make me ready. Maybe. It's hard to tell because we were given so little. For 13 to acknowledge that she can't go there and that she's a mess is a big thing on a personal level, and it felt like some kind of character growth for the era, but it also just cut down Thasmin in one fell swoop. It stopped it dead, because the power of the Doctor, for all that it was a really fun episode, had no Thasmin in it. Sure, there were some little moments like Yaz and the Doctor on opposite sides of the glass after 13 is de-regenerated, Yaz carrying the Doctor with 13's head tucked into her neck, and I guess the moment when 13's hand starts to regenerate, but none of it was actually Thasmin. The shooting script certainly didn't offer any hints of Thasmin. There was no reference made to their chat, to how either of them are handling these romantic feelings, nothing. It's as if it didn't happen, and therefore, to me, the Thasmin storyline feels incomplete. And then Yaz is sort of booted out of the TARDIS without any logical reason for it, nothing to properly acknowledge this decision, and we're left to infer again, probably because the Doctor didn't want Yaz to stay with her given the feelings that they have for each other. Surely it must make things a little awkward, but not that we've seen that in any shape or form. Given that Yaz had said prior to season 13 to Jack Harkness that she wished she'd never known the Doctor because knowing her and then having to do without her, knowing the universe but then having to do without the universe was worse than not knowing about it at all. The fact that Yaz repeatedly refused to leave the Doctor and saying that she was with the Doctor no matter what at the end of season 11 points to the idea that Yaz would not want to give up travelling with the Doctor, and I doubt that would have changed with a new regeneration. These were some of Yaz's strongest character moments of the era, so to have her just leave the Doctor didn't make sense. There was nothing to indicate that any of that had changed, even with the Doctor telling her that nothing could happen between them. And the Doctor had said she wanted this to go on forever, so why is she suddenly saying to Yaz that this is their final trip? Did we miss a conversation where Yaz told the Doctor she would leave when she regenerated? Again, we're left to infer. And then we were given an incomplete ending where they didn't even say goodbye to each other. The Doctor just leaves her at a park. It wouldn't have taken much for the ending to play better. I didn't even need it to have a kiss, in all honesty, just a stronger logic for why Yaz finally left and some kind of acknowledgement of this huge emotional thing that had happened between them. A few lines so we could understand where they were at after the chat on the beach. But we were given none of it, just as we were given breadcrumbs for these two the whole way. All the other companion relationships that had an undercurrent gave far more story, far more character development, relationship development, and textual acknowledgement than Thasmin ever did. I wonder how much of the softly tentative approach was because it was same-sex, and how much of it was poor writing. It's hard to say. The sad thing is that for all that entire final special was about how loved the Doctor is by all of their companions, by how many people they've touched over the years, 13 wouldn't allow herself to be loved. It seems that the Doctor is stuck in a repetitive cycle of pain and loss, saying that she can't go there with Yaz because eventually it'll hurt, but it doesn't stop the hurt. But at least the companions have each other. The Doctor is once again alone, driven by this incessant need to run and never stop. But I guess I had hoped that she could, maybe for just a moment, stop with Yaz. So there you go, my rambly, unfettered thoughts on this era. A mixed bag of writing quality, the foundations for an epic love story that faltered and fell on its face, and yet this era has me by the throat more than any other before it. It's an era that has some wonderful ideas, but they didn't have the time to go very far with it. It's probably, for all that 13 was bright and positive, one of the more tragic Doctors because she didn't let anyone near her as she went through one of the most traumatic discoveries of their lives that reverberated to the very core of who they are, and yet Yaz was standing there begging to be let in. For all I've just said, I love 13, I love Thasmin, and I will miss this era a lot. Okay, did you make it through this with me? I would love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, lady lovers.